Yoorrook Justice Commission is now in session.
Good morning. We welcome everybody present today at Charcoal Lane, with others watching via the live stream. Today we are commencing Block 2 of the Yoorrook Justice, our public hearings, with some truth-telling from Uncle Larry Walsh and his daughter Isabel Papaya Yoorrook Morphy Walsh. Before we get started, I would like to invite Commissioner Hunter to give an acknowledgement of country.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to acknowledge we are streaming from the lands of the Wurundjeri and pay my respects to Elders, specifically Uncle Larry, for attending today to give his evidence. I would like to recognise and acknowledge all those that have come before us to get us to where we are today, and may Bunjil watch over us as we do Aboriginal business. I would like to start today by giving a minute's silence for those that have gone before us.
Thank you, everybody. Please be seated and we will return to the chair.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Miss Fitzgerald. Sorry.
Chair, I welcome Uncle Larry Walsh and his daughter, Isabel Papajaruk Morphy Walsh, to the hearing room today. They are supported by Hannah Nayuk Morphy Walsh and Victoria Morphy. Chair, as a preliminary matter today, I would like to make an application for a restricted publication order under section 26(1)(b) of the Inquiries Act in respect of paragraphs 17, 18 and 40 of Uncle Larry Walsh's Belert Kitchiara, on the grounds in section 2B that the nature and subject matter of the information in those paragraphs is sensitive.
Thank you, Ms Fitzgerald. I confirm that the order will be made in the terms sought and published on the Yoorrook website.
As matters stand, we're not intending to lead any oral evidence from Uncle Larry in respect of those restricted matters today, but if we do get into that territory, we would rely on the standing order that you made under section 24 of the Inquiries Act at the start of hearing block 1, and we would then temporarily adjourn so that the live stream could be paused if Uncle Larry did wish to cover some of that territory, or Isabel did wish to cover some sensitive territory.
Thank you.
Welcome again, Uncle and Isabel. You know me, I'm counsel assisting this Royal Commission, and my name is Sarala Fitzgerald. The young fellow over there, our ceremonial officer, will ask you to each make an affirmation to speak the truth.
Uncle Larry Walsh, do you solemnly undertake to provide truthful evidence to the Yoorrook Justice Commission at today's Yoorrook Justice?
I do.
Thank you, Uncle Larry. Isabel Papajaruk Morphy Walsh, do you solemnly undertake to provide truthful evidence to the Yoorrook Justice Commission at today's Yoorrook Justice?
I do.
Thank you.
Uncle, will you introduce yourself to the commissioners?
My name is Larry Walsh. I have, unfortunately, my mother's passed. I never got to meet my father. because he died in 1968, a year after actually on the same month, a year after the 67 referendum. And I still have a brother out there that I've never met. I discuss that in the papers, but it's important. Alan, I'm nearly 70. You are already 70. It's time we met. I know why we haven't. I know the promise you made. That promise died 6 years ago. It's time we met. I've always wanted to know who you are and what you look like and what your family's been. I've never had that opportunity in the last 69 years. If you hear this, or your children are hearing this, I will ask Yoorrook, if you phone, to pass on my contacts. I think 69 years is a long time. It's enough. Let's have that discussion we should have had maybe 15 years ago. Why I say that at the beginning, it's because it's true.
And it's been on your mind, hasn't it?
It has for most of my life, wondering where he is, who is he, how he was raised.
And all of this testimony, preparing it, it all swells together. So
I wanted to get that out first because from now on it might be about other things, will be about my life and that, but I do make it clear it's not his or his father's fault, my father, or my mother's reasons for it. I understand. I accepted after finding out. It's 10 years later. This is what happened. It's time. And first of all, I'd like to say, I'd like to thank you for having me. There has been a lot of anger that I've kept under control for many years because I find the more you complain about what's wrong, the less you do. So I made it my thing to not complain, to just try and create change. I never created any change by myself because people don't realise what I do, because as soon as I do it, I move on. I am perhaps the third best networker in this state. I am perhaps the third or fourth best at planning something in this state when I get the data. I have always been lucky that family members of mine and other people, including the friends throughout Victoria and family throughout Victoria, have always recognised that with me. So when my family need a hand, they give me a call to come down. And this is how, in some cases, I got involved in a lot of the state issues of those times. I was asked to join in because my family knew my skills, and they knew as a networker I could judge people's skills and see where they could fit into the team we were trying to form to get things done. I'm underutilised because I'm also slightly eccentric. By slightly eccentric, people sometimes say, oh man, he's out there. And sometimes people go, you know, we didn't know whether to believe you or not because what you were saying sounded out there, but it turned out to be true.
it's always true, my father. When the minute you're like, nah, I don't believe it anymore. The minute you're like, nah, he's pushing it too far, the apple cart's not going to go, it's going to tip over. The minute you think that, that's when exactly what he said comes to fruition and you're proven wrong. And all, like, yeah.
It's only because I have such a concentration level.
Uncle, you were talking about how it is always true. One of the things that I should do before we get too far is just confirm that what you've put in your bullet
It is
the
all
truth.
true.
You've been through that, spent a lot of time with your daughter, with me. Are you happy to confirm that what is in that
It is all
is
true,
the truth?
but it is all true, but it's the inside and outside stories that are never mentioned. You know, it's always someone's made the head of something, or someone is the spokesperson, or someone is the leadership. But it's like when we first started Stolen Generations, I'd go in the pub to have a beer with the boys and girls of the park. Some of them will walk up to me and go, "We can't do this, bros." But then one said to me, but I can't go and do it, bros. I would refuse to talk. But I'll tell you what, I have a couple of media contacts. I'll set them up for you to talk to. So everyone assisted in ways, little ways that might not mean much to everybody else. But when you're considering with street groups, you have differences, but at those points they always rallied. The elders always backed me, even if they didn't quite understand what I was up to. The parks always backed me because we'd been in the same backgrounds. And when I'd asked for help, they gave it. And some of them are the unsung stories. For instance, in there you'll notice I talk about helping change a few different acts or a few different constitutions. It was never me alone. It was always others. So what I'm getting at is, despite this evidence here, it's correct, but it's always those little people
Can I just interrupt?
that we don't hear.
Can I just interrupt and say, by parkies, Dad's talking about a specific identified community within our community, and so our community will know who we're talking about, but people outside our community might not know who we're talking about.
Yeah, who are the parkies?
The parkies are the people who live in the parks that are black. The
Is that
homeless.
just around Fitzroy, or is it
Not
everywhere?
necessarily.
Fitzroy, in my day, Fitzroy, Collingwood, Flinders Street, St Kilda, and a couple of other areas, because when I was working at the Aboriginal Legal Service, that was my job, to reach out to all those groups.
I suppose the other point I wanted to make about Dad's connection to a lot of parkies is that, I mean, he spent time being a parkie. So, you know, I remember that in my youth when Dad left home for a while and lived as a parkie. I remember Mum bringing us to see him, and he had a electric cord tied round his waist as a belt. So the parkies is a lived experience for my father, but more than that, the parkies are disproportionately made up of foster care kids, of kids that are wards of the state, the new parkies, the young parkies, the same. And so I suppose the reason my dad identified and also fell into that community so easily, or that subsection of our community which is important so easily, is also because disproportionately these fellas, and primarily they were fellas, of course there's some beautiful parky women too, strong women, but it's because they came from the same places. It's sort of not a mistake, actually. It's not a mistake that the parkies all have ward of the state backgrounds.
Uncle, I was just going to, just so we don't miss out on it, I wanted to talk to you about your early life, just so we capture some of what your daughter was just talking about in terms of your early life in foster care.
Well-
You've given us some documents,
Yeah.
and the one that I just wanted to start with, because it is so powerful, is the order to admit you to the care of under the Children's Court Act, that you've managed to obtain the order that took you from your mother, and it's at page 119 of the 298-page PDF, and I can just have it brought up so that we can see that.
You see, my mother was in hospital at the time. My father had left with my older brother, the one I've never met. This is things I find out later. He had left. My mother was in hospital, and so myself and two of my sisters ended up before the magistrate's court, sentenced with a criminal conviction at 2.5 to in need of care and protection and given a criminal conviction. When I used to talk about it, like even during Stollingen's inquiry and even after they formed the Aboriginal Bringing Them Home office, and I think I won't mention the chair at the time by name, but he at the time said to me, I don't know if you're right there. And then when he was also assisting with Woorrook Dungan helped me find what I'd been claiming since I was 15, because every time I went to court, every time I would be arguing back, because I didn't mind having argue with the police.
And Uncle, I might bring that up so
prosecutor,
we can prove it
but every
today.
time that was used.
Yep. If
for
I
the
can,
courts
if you
to
can bring up
hear
page
that I was-
64.
I also just want to say really briefly that this is the basis of fundamental changes to my father's life and also to the intergenerational trauma that's handed on. So one really tiny example that comes from this very story, the one thing that Dad didn't know, and especially all throughout my childhood, because we've gathered information as we've gotten older, a lot of these FOI requests, and in fact that FOI request came when I was in my 20s, so in the last decade. This is all new information that we're able to get about my father, that we've always kind of thought and known but never has been confirmed. And like one of the, even the little things, we always knew, one of the stories that had always travelled down before we got the documents was that my dad's mum was giving birth to his brother, and that's why the three of them were back in the Humpy with an aunt. So, you know, our fear of hospitals, which we have and we discuss a little bit later on, and then, you know, it's reinforced by a whole bunch of other things, but it actually even stems from this basic moment where, you know, the basis of my father's first interaction with the medical system is knowledge that it can be used to take either himself or his mother away.
And we have that document in the materials. I'll just quickly move from this one
Yeah,
because it's
just that
almost
I wanna
impossible
say
to
about
read.
That,
Yeah.
that nobody believed it. I believe the only other one apart from me that was raising this was Jackie Charles and another cousin of mine who is better known as Belgium No Jurisdiction Edwards. I seem to have a few characters in my family from those orphanage foster days, and it's developed some of them into the people they are now, because once they start learning more about themselves, they realise it was the system that gave them all their problems. And to quote my cousin, governments, you made me the criminal I am.
No, he says he's an institutional made man.
Yeah, but
Does
he
your
also
does
called
Uncle
it
Chop?
out.
And Uncle, we can see on this document, it's very hard to read, so I'm going to read my version. But the very first entry on your criminal record there was recorded in Mooroopna, and the court is the Mooroopna CC, the Mooroopna Children's Court, on the 24th of May 1956. So next week will be the anniversary of that date.
Yes.
And your crime was that at 2.5 years old, you were, the offence is listed as, I can read this, and you, it would be good for you to confirm that I'm correct. It says, child in need of care and protection.
Correct.
That's correct. At the same time, my two sisters were also put under that act.
I mean,
we were then moved to Tirana, which back then was the baby's home. It was not Tirana Youth Training Centre as we call it today. It divided into Baltara, Tirana, which became the Youth Justice, and Baltara for kids in need of care and protection 12 and under. So I was in there when it was just, if you like, the passing through place. You were sent there, they then sent you on to other places.
it's always gotten up my craw, this particular, well, okay, so to be completely honest, this is a shame job on me. I didn't believe that. So when I hit uni, I got into law, and I studied that for 8 years, and I came out with no formal qualifications. But I studied it for 8 years, and initially, what the law teaches you, and it's totally colonial, is that the law teaches you essentially to believe in it, to believe in its ability to protect you, and to believe in its ability to right injustice. And I didn't believe that the law could be so unjust as to give a child a criminal conviction. So I didn't believe him. We fought about it because he raised, my parents raised me to have a voice. And I know they regretted that when I hit about 14. And in fact, they used to say it to me sometimes, but they raised me to have a voice. And so I didn't believe it. He knew that I didn't believe him. And when I did, when he was correct, and shame on me for not believing him. And I read all of this. It's not just the criminal conviction that gets up my craw. It's the actual words in the conviction. My father was living, yes, in a humpy by the banks of the Goulburn River. My father's family had been living in humpies on the banks of rivers for hundreds and hundreds of years. He was in no more danger than any other child who was raised in that way, of which some of our community were able to hold on to their kids and raise them in that way. The very fact that, even those words listed, the idea that Dad wasn't cared for, his mother was not physically present at the time, and they had a caregiver because she was giving birth. What
Isabel,
indication?
That's what we see, and you get that from this document, don't you? At the
Yes.
time the children were admitted, mother was in hospital receiving treatment, and the children were being cared for by her mother, and those other descriptions.
Yes.
This is where you find that out.
Auntie Vera was there. That's not on there, but Auntie Vera was there. So
That
that's
was the
my.
other
She's the
sister.
last one. She's the last one still left that's still alive in Nan's
She
generation.
was Mum's sister, and her and Nan were caring for the three of us. So it
She
wasn't
was
like
14.
Nan was doing it alone.
Yep,
There
and
was-
so although there's the record in the removal order earlier says mother not able to care for the child, in fact she was in hospital at the time.
Yes.
She was literally not able to care for the child because she was giving birth, so she got in touch with her mother who raised her to care for the child. And her sister also came along who was 14, and as we all know, 14-year-olds are pretty good babysitters, especially when they've got extra adult supervision. I was.
So for me, yes, everything you will show is true. There is some evidence that I believe will show a pattern of me requesting help from the authorities for my own. I had a rage problem that almost made me kill people. A few times I had to be stopped. In there, my report it talks about too.
And you're speaking about some records in this material from Tirana where you get to speak to a psych or a social worker about your rage issues?
Yes,
Yep.
but there's also another one. I had a previous FOI, which Philip Fox, a lawyer, asked me for a copy of to see if they could do something about it. And I can't find that one, but it also mentions that the other one, if we can ever get it, someone sue Philip Fox for it. It mentions that the welfare worker, social worker, whatever they were, after what happened on my 8th birthday, he thought I was having panic attacks and I needed help.
So,
Nothing done.
so Dad provides testimony in here about his 8th birthday party, his only ever birthday party, and his first panic attack. And I've lost my point. I'm sorry, Dad. You'll have
It
to
was
take that.
recorded.
Yes, it was recorded. So basically what Dad's saying is after that, Miss Noakes, who was Dad's foster mum for the largest period of time, she noticed the panic attack and thought that she would report that to the authorities or whatever. And the social worker actually came out, did an investigation of it, did a write-up. And this file is still sitting in Philip Fox's possessions because we weren't given it back. After they rejected it, told Dad that he didn't have a case, they didn't give us the files back. And so there's an actual file in there where the social worker notes that Mrs. Noakes thinks that he's having panics, that he got all sweaty and his face went white. And she said in that, I believe Larry is displaying signs of distress and needs further assistance. So there are also documents that we know exist that we don't have access to, that in this round of files when we asked for them, they were redacted. Because also the files that we've been able to provide, that's only half of them, because half of them have been redacted. And the reasoning that we mostly are given for why they're redacted is that they might have someone else's name on them. So for example, I know that they redacted one of the files because it's about both my father and his sister Patsy. So that gave them license to redact all of it from us. But there's other things that also are still in here, and particularly the psychologist's reports from his prison systems. They've always been redacted when we've gotten those. So, you know, my dad's complete file picture isn't there. And I am at this point incredibly suspicious of why, because everything that we have found so far basically shows to me that the state knew exactly what they were doing, and well, not that what they were doing, but they knew exactly the homes and the scenarios that they were placing him into.
Can I just ask, so these records are with the state?
Yeah,
Yes.
these are all state government records, and so the state government has them. Philip Fox has some that we don't have, and it's interesting. The reason Philip Fox comes up, and we're a little bit suspicious of this, and we don't 100% know what the go is, but Dad went to them, or they came to Dad and
They
said, "We'll
came
help
to
you
me.
work out if you have a case to sue the government for stolen gens." They got the FOI, this first FOI with all these files in it. Suddenly they said, "Dad, you don't have a case." And then it turns out they were actually providing the government advice on what should be given to people in Dad's
Like me.
position, what should be given out on an FOI request. So we've become fundamentally, and maybe nothing's gone wrong. However, those set of circumstances make me, it's fishy. Something's fishy, and considering the way this country has tried not to take account for stolen generation survivors or compensate them for the clear infringements upon their human rights that were placed on them by the state, it just makes me think that A, the state is waiting for them all to die so that they can't get any compensation and recognition, or B, they're covering it all up until they die so that they can't get any recognition. And I am just so lucky that I happen to come from one of the ones who has survived thus far. You know, I have uncles and aunts who haven't survived, whose kids won't even get a look in, who the continuation of trauma in those families don't even get a look in terms of the political conversations that occur.
But again, we will go into that later. My point is that whilst this says I have a problem, it is not the first time the government has written that, and it won't be, well, hopefully it is the last time, but it shows that they recognised something was wrong and did nothing. And that rage, that anger, I had to learn to control. I had to be stopped 4 or 5 times before I did kill people, I must admit. I am not going to pretend to be a good man. My early life was not good. It was filled with rage, anger, and I would overstep the mark. But you see, I didn't try ever. All I wanted was peace, but people would keep trying to fight me, and I'd keep trying to say to them I didn't want to, and then one hit later, once I got struck, that was it. I would lose it completely. I would be just a red haze in front of me with their throat in my hands,
So Dad,
or their face being busted with my hands.
so Dad,
Me trying to throw people into trains, me trying to throw people under trams, me trying deliberately to kill people, and no one in the system, when I said it, would help. So I had to learn to control that rage all by myself. Every now and then, I used to go away just to fight trees, just to fight walls, just to let that rage out, because I'd come back. The injuries would heal overnight. May have broken metacarpals in my hand, may have had other injuries I caused myself, but it was the way to get it out until I learnt another way of controlling it. I had to learn that myself. Every now and then, sometimes when people bother me too much, I let them see a peek of it,
so Dad,
and then everyone backs away from me.
can I contextualise?
No, but I've got to say that it took me 40 years to learn how to use it to tell people no. Before that, I would have to go away, or someone would get hurt, or someone would end up in jail, and likely me. So I believe in my heart, in my head, that the system failed me, not just by giving me a childhood conviction. It failed me time and time again when I requested help, when social workers wrote something was wrong. I was not getting any. The fact that I'm here and not using my anger anymore, and haven't used my anger for 30 years to harm someone, the fact that now and then I would come home covered in blood.
Can I contextualise, please? Yeah.
My daughter noticed one night she woke up
Can I
when
contextualise,
I was
please?
getting
Yeah.
home. Yeah, I'm just saying, when I was getting home, just for me to go and have a shower to wash off all my blood.
I promise if I move on, you can interrupt me and tell
Yeah.
me. I just want to say, let's contextualise this stuff. in his statement around 30 and 31. And one of the particular things that he says that I think is particularly relevant is he says, these were not the choices that I wanted to make, but these were the only choices I had at the time. And I want to talk a little bit about my father's violence because I have a very different view of it. And that's possibly because I'm a child of his, but I actually think it's because I'm not him. Because he is caught in the situation, he often feels shame and guilt about things that I do not think he deserves to feel shame and guilt about. He often feels shame and guilt and that has been placed upon him, right? You know, my dad is talking about these violent incidences. What he hasn't told you is about the fact that my father was the only Aboriginal person in the towns that he was in the suburb, in the communities. In the schools he was in, he was banned from fighting, and what that meant was that every kid was able to hit him, but if he hit back, he was told he would immediately be sent back to the orphanage and out of his foster care environment and away from any friends that he had made. You know, my father wasn't given, like, it's not like, when he's talking about violence, it's not like my life. When I grew up, in my childhood, not all of it, but for the majority of my childhood, I got to choose if violence was a part of my life or not. There are a few instances where I didn't, but for the majority of my childhood, I got to choose. My father didn't. Violence was a part of his everyday existence, and it was a part of him. And then there was no one talking to him about how to move through that. There was no one providing him solutions. And in fact, he also talks about it in here. His foster parent at the time responded to this situation by saying, okay, I'll teach you how to defend yourself. And essentially, he was a veteran, and Dad has, again, you'll read this and you'll see Dad has so much more empathy than I am capable of in this scenario. He was placed with a veteran who had PTSD and was alcoholic and substance abusing, was beating my father and his wife. And so when Dad was banned from fighting, his response was then to teach my father holds and choking positions that could cripple a person very quickly. The only way he knew how to teach that to a human, and my father doesn't say this explicitly either, the only way that was taught to my father was by having that done to my father. So this is the model he's getting at home for how to resolve this. And then he's going into schools, and and when he gets to Tirana and there's fights at Tirana, he's saying, I'm distressed. At
Isabel,
no point.
Can we go to this piece of evidence? This is just a beautiful reflection of what you're saying. Youth, I think that's Uncle Larry.
Yes.
Youth was taken into the Noakes home at the age of 6 years. He committed this offence when he'd run away from home. He's very conscious of his colour, stating this causes too many fights. He states he hates fighting. In his own words, have you ever won a fight and gone home and cried?
But also, right, I know that the world has moved on in terms of psychology, in terms of how we treat kids and all of those kinds of things. But in what world is that a happy and well little boy? In what world are you, a caseworker, looking over that little boy and get that notice and go, he's perfectly fine, leave him where he is, let's not even ask a question? Dad is empathetic. So, you know, Dad lived with the Noakeses. He, you know, cared for Mrs. Noakes until she died, and for Mr. Noakes. And they were gone by his 30s, before I was around. He has compassion for them because he lived with them for over, he was involved in their lives for over 2 decades. And he also understands that Mr. Noakes had PTSD, which no one else understood at the time. But I can't have that compassion because the state knew. The state knew.
Isabel, one of the other things I wanted to talk about with the Noakeses is, in particular, Mrs. Noakes' ambivalence about Uncle's Aboriginality and search for his continuing questions. If I could just bring up page 12, and then there's quite a few of these social work notes where this first one, if we, the background, Larry often seems to be teased because of his background.
One thing I want you to notice about most of those reports, you notice they do not refer to me in the person in the room. Most of these reports are my foster mother's opinions, not any of mine. So again, the social workers were very bad at their job. They should have interviewed me separately from my foster parents, but they never did.
That says, Miss Noakes says Larry is becoming, sorry, I haven't read this bit. I mean, I've read all of them, but sometimes you miss bits. It says, sorry, I find this funny. I thought you would too, Dad. Miss Noakes said that Larry is really becoming a teenager. He wants to grow his hair long. You've managed to now.
I managed to the minute I got 15. Never got it cut again.
Well, maybe that's why I've never had any restrictions
so-
around my flowing locks.
So what I'm saying is, please take into account when you're reading most of the transcripts supposedly between the welfare, my foster parents and myself, you'll notice a lot of the times there is very little conversation with me. And one of the biggest problems was, I already knew I was Aboriginal. And yet they kept trying to deny it.
So it says, the social worker asked if Larry knew of his racial background, brackets, this had been a problem before, end bracket. Mrs. Noakes said that she had told him that she thought he was quarter caste. She said she's not sure about this and Larry would really like to know. Mrs. Noakes has pointed out that he should not worry about what the others say because there are plenty of European boys in his class who are as dark as he is. Now this seems to be
Italians and
after...
Maltese.
In earlier notes, I think Mrs. Noakes is flat out denying to
Yeah,
you that
she
you're
does. Earlier
Aboriginal.
notes says there's things where Mrs. Noakes is like, it's just not relevant to Dad.
Yeah,
I'll let you talk on it, but the only thing I'll say is, because I know it's your story, Dad, but the only thing I'll say is that, you know, I cannot believe the surreal nature of a unformed prefrontal cortex brain of an 8-year-old who is being hit at school for being a black bastard. I cannot imagine what it would do to that 8-year-old's mind to go home or to every major authority around him and say, I'm Aboriginal, meaning like I'm being hit for being black, so let me connect with anything black. Let me be black then. If I am Aboriginal, because that was also why Dad was asking, because he wanted to be with his people. Even then he knew he wasn't with his people.
I also kept asking questions about parentage and family.
And they would always tell him he was unwanted. They would always say to him that he was the reason that he was there is because he was unwanted, that none of his family members requested information about him or asked about him, and his mother had never been heard of again. We found out years later, and we wrote it in Dad's testimony, and it is actually something that I believe affected my nan's relationship with all of her children who were taken, the lies around this. It turns out that my nan wrote basically monthly, maybe not that frequently, but basically she wrote a lot to Dad, to Joylene, to Patsy, and to the authorities trying to gain photographs. I've seen a letter where she tried to just get a photograph, where she's tried to gain access to them, custody. There's even letters where they asked Dad and tried to apply pressure on her to give Dad away for adoption, and she refused to sign the form that allowed Dad to be adopted. And all the while Dad's told, she's not communicating at all with you. And then she's told in response, your son doesn't want these letters. He doesn't want anything to do with you. He, you know, can you imagine how heartbreaking it was for Melva in that scenario? You know, because also she was a disenfranchised woman living at a time when she had less power because of the actual very dark nature of her skin. And you don't believe that stuff, but when you hear that stuff for 20 years and some of your kids don't come home...
Isabel, I'm going to take you to page 100 first, and then I will I found in the documents those exact moments that you've spoken of. I'll just close off on this searching for Aboriginality, which keeps getting shut down. At the bottom of page 100, well, firstly, I have to take you to the, a little bit above it. If we can just scroll down a little bit more, so that we get the very bottom of the page. Perfect. Yeah, we can stop there. Now, really just because it's revealing, you see there Mrs. Noakes felt, the social worker pointed out, there was a concern that Larry was going to leave. Mrs. Noakes was incredibly attached to Uncle Larry, and it seems as though it was very concerned that his mother would in fact come back and take him, and was obviously not wanting that to happen and undermining that eventuality. So the social worker pointed out to Mrs. Noakes that it is unlikely that Larry wants to leave them. Like boys of his age, he probably wants somewhere to himself, like a cubby house or tree hut, etc. Mrs. Noakes felt that because he is part Aboriginal, he wants to go walkabout. However, social worker pointed out that Aborigines learn this behaviour by living together from each other. Larry has not had a chance to learn this, as he only lived with his family for about 2 years. And then social worker also discussed the fact that Larry does not know he is part Aboriginal. So at this point, she hasn't even given the lie of a quarter caste.
But here's the thing.
This is also
You're in orphanages with your sister, me, up until 5, 6. No one in the orphanage is Aboriginal. You go to another place because they separated boys and girls. Known there as Aboriginal. Known there in the boys' home associating with his cousins as Aboriginal, although we didn't know it back then. And yet I get to foster homes and everyone's trying to deny what I've always been said of in every home and every orphanage.
The other thing that this document is actually an indication of is what's going on around it, which is that Dad is currently at this time learning holds and how to punch people quickly. And by that I mean Mr. Noakes is currently, this is also the time period that that began and stepped up, because Mr. Noakes' alcoholism and PTSD started to run untreated. So the other piece of context for this document, that they're talking about Larry wanting to go away. Actually, Dad did want to leave at this point in time. He was very unhappy and he was trying to run away repeatedly. And instead of anyone asking Dad what was going on, why his behaviour was exhibited like this, they made pretty racist assumptions, as you can see.
There's also a
but
record
by the way,
of Larry
can I say something about
hiding
that too?
things in the backyard.
Yeah, but can I say something about that? You noticed earlier from one of the others where I talk about him hiding his flagons of red wine and whiskey in the garden. Odd that he could find that stuff so quite readily, my so-called stash of food. Maybe I was indicating something else, but nobody ever asked me. I mean, I was putting the fucking food right next to his fucking plonk.
But also,
What
Dad,
else was I indicating? Maybe I was indicating he should leave.
Dad didn't
No, but yeah,
have
I didn't have the language.
for a lot of this stuff, because even though now we're starting to get into a little bit of a time when Dad is more articulate, you know, he's moving out of childhood and he's getting to teenagerdom and stuff, he still didn't have the language for any of this stuff, and he didn't have anyone in his corner who was remotely interested in providing him that language or discussing it with him, or the closest he had were other Aboriginal foster kids that he knew that he was being discouraged from being around because they were considered bad influences and making him think he was black.
Can I
But
just
yeah,
ask, were
yeah.
you the only child in that
Yes.
placement?
I believe the real reason they fostered me was not so much about me as to save their own marriage. Look, they were an older couple. She was from squadocracy, the foster mother. The foster father, his father and his brothers moved out here after the First World War, got, what do you call them, soldier settlements,
Yep.
even though they were English soldiers. They fought in, they came out here, that was the deal, the British made. They became big landowners. So he, at the time, when he was fostering me, not only did he have his own small business, but he owned land in South Melbourne, Chelsea. I could name a few places, but he had to sell them off every time to pay for his court cases. So from a man who came from a very middle-class background, and war destroyed him, because one of the beauties of him, he had a great library of English classics, American classics, European classics,
My dad learned to read.
and other things, and I would read them for something to do.
So I have dyslexia, and I can't spell for crap, and but my grammar, I can put a sentence together with a nice little twang. Whereas my father, it's like the opposite. So we write well together because I'll put a nice little sentence together and he'll make sure it's all spelt correctly and using these big words from novels that I'm astounded by.
I don't read
If
much.
I can take you to page 163, I would just like some appreciation of the beauty of your father's handwriting at 17 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, you notice I don't write like that anymore. If you ever get a letter from me, it's in capitals or in, what
So
do they
the
call
story
it?
for
Script.
how Dad ended up at the Noakes, the story for that goes that there was a veteran involved in the orphanage that Dad was in at that stage, and
Salvation Army.
the Salvation Army, and Dad had been kicked in and out, sent to a few different homes, all failed, and it was assumed that he would continue to kick around the orphanage until basically adulthood. So there was a veteran involved, that was a vet, Mr. Noakes, that was in Mr. Noakes' regiment, that was somehow involved with the orphanage. And he came to Mr. Noakes and he said, we've got this kid, and if he doesn't get out of here soon, that's it. He's going to become, he's made for prison. Because he too could see the pathway between foster care into the prison institution. So that's why the Noakeses initially became interested in Dad, because their marriage was on the fritz. Mr. Noakes identified with characters who could potentially, Dad was always seen, so unfairly, Dad always was seen for his potential for the bad things he could do. At that time, no one looked at him for the potential for the good things that he had and that he could do. And I think at that time, Mr. Noakes actually identified with the darkness in Dad. Because Mr. Noakes was pretty dark himself. And I think he thought he could save this child. But ultimately, his PTSD and his alcoholism got to him. And then once he began to beat Mrs. Noakes reliably in front of my father and to beat my father,
Oh, don't worry.
hasn't seemed I don't know, you just don't respect that parental figure.
No,
so,
but you've
know.
got to remember, I got me revenge. Somewhere in the thing I mentioned that I got sick of him hitting his wife, so I put a plan together where I was going to punch into him and then bolt out the back door, and as he bolted out after me, I used a piece of wood and told him, on him,
But see,
and told him never hit her again.
But see, some people think that this is just a story of gratuitous violence that my father is telling, and that is not what is going on. My father is telling this story because he had no other choice at that stage in his life. His choice was to continue to watch his mother be beaten, foster mother be beaten, and be beaten himself, or to enact a piece of violence. And my father, one of the most heartbreaking parts of my whole father's written testimony, he writes about violence bringing him peace, and the dichotomy, the horrible trap that felt for a teenager, for the only way to know that I am going to be safe from being physically harmed for the next 3 weeks is if I commit an egregious act of violence. You know, Dad doesn't put it in that way, but that's because Dad's had to be strong. He's had to live a different life from the life I've had to live.
Look, in plain, simple terms, I never wanted to fight, but if I was going to fight,
You're going to do it well.
got hurt. Then I'd be left alone for a couple of weeks because nobody else wanted to risk being hurt. So if I broke someone's arm in football or I did something that hurt a couple of people, a few punches, but a few weeks, no trouble.
The last thing I'll say on Dad's violence is this. This is something that, this is one of the reasons he's gotten me here, because this is very challenging for him to talk about. But my father carries physical injuries as a result of his childhood. So there is scarring, and I know this because I'm my father's primary carer, and so we do a lot of doctor's appointments together, because also we find medical institutions often quite racist and disenfranchising, and when we don't do it together, our care isn't often as competent. So we do it together. So I'm acutely, I know 100% what is going on with my father's body, and I can tell you that he has scarring on a muscle tissue level all throughout his shoulders and back down into his hips. So, you know, usually when people, they think about old people and their pain and their backs and their it's joints, yeah, and arthritis, that's the kind of pain you're imagining. That's not what's going on with Dad. With Dad, all of his muscles at some point in childhood have been expanded so far that they've actually ripped and scarred. And it's happened repeatedly throughout childhood, and the only people, when this was finally diagnosed, because this took a long time actually to get diagnosis, they had to do MRIs, they had to do, you had to do all sorts of things to actually work out. And they didn't think it would be what it was, because this scarification, the most two common types of people that exhibit this type of scarification through muscle tissue is child soldiers and child slaves. So I'm not trying to insinuate that my father was either a child soldier or a child slave. I'm not. What I am trying to say is the level of violence and physical harm placed on his body repetitively before his body was developed we can see it. Doctors can see it. He can't lift his arms up beyond here now. Maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic, but, and most people, and this will be a shock for any of our community that's listening, that hears this today, or for most of you, because my father, one of the things that his trauma has done to him is that he needs to be strong and he needs to be tough. And that's also partly why I'm so proud of him for this, and for him allowing me later to testify about intergenerational trauma, because he's humbling and vulnerable. He's making himself vulnerable. And to allow me to say this about his body is also him making himself vulnerable. And I say this not to be, oh, poor fellow me, but I say this because, isn't that shocking? Like, I believe it because I live with him, and I know basically Dad can't reach any cupboard. I know that basically Dad can't, we have whole different systems in our house so that Dad can access all the things he needs. And it makes me so angry sometimes on his behalf, because that was a gift given to him from his childhood, from being hit so many times. And our doctor, our GP, that we actually developed a relationship with, that over a couple of years that they'd diagnosed this, she cried when she got the report. She cried at us. And it's not the first time we've had doctors cry at us, but she cried because she and she apologised. And I think many other doctors probably owe Dad an apology, and possibly community members if they realise how much pain that this man carries. But she apologised to him because she was like, I was not dealing with your pain levels appropriately before. I thought it was joint and skeletal issues. I'm sorry, Uncle Larry. You know, the amount of pain that this man has had to carry, and then also the fact that people just repeatedly do not believe him until irrefutable evidence is placed in front of them. I mean, why would you not believe a man who's saying, I can't move my shoulder, it's in so much pain? Why would you not believe that? But eventually it does. Thankfully, eventually you find the good soul.
You know why? It's because I've always maintained, no matter who hit me, no matter what was used on me, I would never show a reaction. Despite my pain, I would go to things and never show a reaction. People thought sometimes that I was a bit off my face, pacing up and down the back of a room at a meeting. No, if I didn't move, the pain would get worse and someone might see it.
It's also another reason that I get
With panic attacks, it was the same thing. I was having them, I knew they were coming, but I would not let anyone see me have one. I would not let anyone see me have any pain. I would not let anyone see me have anxiety. I would not let anyone, because I was there to help mine. And if mine were in pain too, I could handle mine.
Do you know when my father...
Lately, I have days where I can't move. I'm frozen solid because of pain. But I never let my pain be seen public.
The other thing I have
They
to
used
say...
to say, in my younger days, no one had ever seen me cry until I turned 40.
I have to also say to my father's credit that actually he's now just publicly discussing panic attacks.
Uncle, it's actually time for us to have a cuppa.
Okay, but I just want to say this. The reason Dad is actually now discussing panic attacks and this level of... So there's twofold reasons that he wanted to discuss these. One, because we are insistent, we know that this is still going on, and we want to be... We hope that this process is a part of addressing that and making sure that our future generations don't continue to feel it. But two, my dad is now speaking out about these things because these are things that his children's generation, and including me, are facing. My father's spoken out today about his panic attacks, which have been his big secret his whole life, because I am now, because over the last 4 to 5 years, I have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and I have panic attacks. My father has started to choose to label these things which make him feel scared and vulnerable because of me and for me. And I know he wants to walk away and he wants to stop, and that's okay, and we will stop in just 1 second, but I just think it's important to understand that the reason he's doing this, the reason he's crying about it, is he wouldn't have done it 10 years ago, 5 years ago, before I got diagnosed. My father would not have told you about his panic attacks. It would have been the rest of the narrative. He wouldn't have gone into the actual trauma. But he's only doing this because he realises that the cycle is perpetuating and he wants it to stop. And I want that on the record, because that is something that gives me immeasurable pride in him.
Thank you.
So continue time, Chair,
Thank you.
for our break.
Yes.
The Yoorrook Justice Commission is adjourned until 11:30.
Thank you.
The Yoorrook Justice Commission has now...
Thank you.
Uncle, before we get off with some more, get on with your testimony, you provided us, when we came and visited, with some photos that I would like to show because they address moments that you've discussed
Yeah.
your evidence so far. And the first I'd like to show is a photo taken of you at your 8th birthday party
Yeah.
that you mentioned in your witness statement. And am I right in saying you're over here? in
I'm
the
that
white-
dark one next to, I can't
He's the
remember
one
who
going
it
like
is.
this.
No, wait. I have to look closer because...
In the white shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the one in the white shirt. Next to me is Italian...
You
first
pointed at Dad.
generation Italian Australian. That was... He lived 4 doors down from me.
But point out you, Dad.
Yeah, okay, that one lived four doors down from me. That one was 2 doors up from me, the Italian parents. That one was directly opposite, German parents.
The reason he brings up the parents is because
Forward.
only the migrant kids would talk to Dad, not the skips.
Yeah. The Fords, I think because their dad was in the same spots as, because a lot of the soldiers from Dad's foster father's group all lived in the same area.
So Daddy,
Some of their kids were the kids I could play with.
Daddy,
Oh,
when
man.
did we get this photo?
That was my 8th birthday. It was sent to Joylene, and Joylene, my sister, had kept all these photos that I didn't even realise existed.
And
Luckily, I sent them as a kid and then forgot about them, so years later they come back to...
The other interesting thing about this photo, and the notes chose this to be the happy snap that they took from this event, is this is actually my father experiencing his first panic attack. It's actually been documented right here. You can see it on his face. Do you want to talk more?
No, it's... we cut the cake, and just after I cut it, the panic attack happened. I turned as white as a ghost, collapsed, vomited, and that was the end of the party, eh? Good way to end the party. Me have a panic attack.
Why did you panic so, Daddy?
Well, you got to remember, I already know I'm banned from fighting. I already know it's restricting where and who I can associate with. So I mainly stuck with the people in the same street as me, rather than... And it was funny, but all the people that were being bullied or being afraid of being bullied always hung around with me because I was never scared of anybody, and I was never worried about what was going to happen or not going to happen. A lot of people say I always looked indifferent to everything. When I was asked questions, I'd always indifferent. No, it wasn't that I was indifferent. It was just that no matter what I say to you, you're not going to listen to me, so why bother? So it was that age I developed all that. I developed an awareness that I was alone. I developed an awareness that there was no one else going to protect me but me. I developed the awareness that the only reasons these people were at the party is they all lived in the same street and they were all friends of the foster parents. It doesn't necessarily mean they were my friends. It just reminded me that I was alone. And so, I don't know why, that might have brought it on, the panic attack. You know, were they really friends?
I mean, it's interesting because this is also the first documentation my father has through the state about his mental health, actually. So this is the file that we've referred to that Philip Fox is in possession of that we were not given back. That the social worker actually commented on this because Mrs. Noakes, because this is early on in Dad's placement with the Noakeses. It was this party. This was one of their sort of like, and their only sort of celebration of having Dad enter their family unit. So this is the so it was very early on. So Miss Noakes did actually report Dad's panic and unease. So this photo represents a lot, not just, you know, represents that, but it also represents the most powerful part of it. I think the pleasantly most powerful part of it
It was also
was that Joylene held the photo for 60 years.
and it also says something else. For me, it says this was the start of me not being able to trust anyone.
And I look at him and
kid
breaks
at
my little
eight.
heart because he's tiny and I was tiny and I looked like that, and he has such dark, beautiful caramel skin, and then you think,
And yet
how
there's
could
still,
they tell him he wasn't a black fella? Look at that face.
Speaking of look at that face, if there's one other photo of Uncle Larry when he's a child with Santa Claus that
Yeah.
I was 6, I think.
is a
at
little
that
bit
one.
earlier, yes.
Yeah, so Joylene kept this. Joylene kept all these. So Dad and Joylene, because they remembered each other, it's in the testimony, because they remembered each other, they got separated at 5. So they would always ask questions about each other or ask to write letters, and most of them were denied, but it looks like 3 letters actually went through to Joylene, and she kept absolutely every single photograph and part of that. And we didn't even know that until her son, Stephen Rao, my cousin, who's a photographer, was sort of rescanning in all the old images that his mum had, and making good quality, and then that's how we found it.
Council, can I?
And if you notice there, look how good looking I was, and look at me now. Look at me now compared to how good looking I was back then. I was a good looking kid. What happened? No, I was just saying, it's sort of like life influences how you look in the end from your life, you know. Person that's had a hard life, you can read it on their face. Person that's had a good life, you can read it on their face. There was a kid that didn't have distrust. There was a kid that didn't have hate. There was a kid who was just finding other new life. And even then he looks like he's got a bit of a cheeky grin. But I would say there's the innocent me. It's
The
not
moving
me.
words just spoken by Uncle Larry make it clear we need to be able to identify this photograph when we come back to it.
Yes,
So
Uncle-
is this in the information pack?
It is
It
not.
isn't?
These
No.
are newly.
Yes.
I would like to tender these if you're if
I'm
you're
okay
happy
with it. I'm
for us
okay
to do
with
that.
it.
I'm happy to tender nicer photographs as well of the photographs.
better
'cause
copy,
We have
yes.
digital
Great.
That-
versions.
Yes.
So we,
Great,
I'm
thank
happy
you.
to. But at Sorella, we just showed her the physical copies when she came and visited us, so that's why.
They're
Yep.
lovely photographs, thank you.
Yes, and so I will identify them though. They will end up being the photograph of the birthday party
Oh,
will
there's
end
the
up
third
being
one, isn't
Annexure
there?
B,
Yep.
and this will be Annexure C.
Thank you.
Oh, and there's the third one.
Which
There
And
is a
that's-
third one.
And that's when I was 21, I think.
my father,
Could we bring that up?
my father just had his accident on his fingers with his guillotine. So this is after the tops of his fingers got chopped off when he was 21, and he sent it to Joylene to be like, still living. So you might notice my dad's fingers are a little bit different. It's funny because one of my favourite teachers in school had exactly the same. He clearly must have cut his hands in guillotine too.
Now, if you worked in either meatworks or in metalworks, it was common to
Well,
have
I
these
liked
accidents
him.
back in the days when there was no guards.
I liked him before he even opened his mouth, that teacher, because he had the same finger as you.
And if you're happy to provide us this as well,
Yeah.
we'll have this as Annexure
But
C.
again, you can see I was dark, and you can see in the younger photos I was dark.
It's
And
very
yet,
hard to imagine that
Up until
this man is not an Aboriginal man.
15, there was all these denials, and then I got sick of the crap, so I'm going, no. and I went under my proper name, which was Walsh.
Not Noakes.
I refused to be an Oaks. Even in secondary school, every time the teachers wanted to write down my name, I'd write down Walsh rather than Noakes, which, by the way, helped get me out of trouble because there was only a Larry Noakes in the school. So whenever some teacher wasn't sure of my name, I'd just write Walsh. And nobody in the school knew who it was, so I got out of trouble here and there again.
Can I ask a question? Yep.
Yes.
Did they officially change your surname to?
No.
No, it was still.
It was still Walsh,
officially,
but because of them being the foster parents,
they enrolled you as.
I had to go under their name.
No,
Uh,
Melva was asked, and in fact it looks like pressured to give Dad and the others, but you know, I'm only going to talk about Dad because Dad's my dad and that's the story I know and that's what I've been given her to talk about. It looks like Nan was pressured quite considerably to sign the forms, which meant that, because Dad was quite young, that he could be adopted, and she refused to sign the form saying that he could be adopted, saying, I want my child back. And I don't know what happened with the others, or because I haven't looked at their files, because I'm his daughter, not Auntie Patsy's or Auntie Jolene's.
but there is very much similarities because she didn't try for one. She wanted the three back.
Uncle, this is a letter of the 10th of September in which there are quite a few records noting that that your mother was very regularly being requested to sign you over for adoption. If we could go to the very bottom of this, the letter indicates on Larry's return to the institution, a couple took him for holidays, and they were interested in adopting you. Because of this, Miss Walsh was approached and interviewed by the local police at Woorronon, near Swan
It's
Hill.
on the border, just up from Swan Hill.
She stated at this time she did not want any of the children adopted, that she was living in a de facto and intended to apply for return of her children. So the police get sent out to ask in these situations, obviously,
Yeah.
and she said no then.
And you've got to understand, back in her days, because of the way she was raised, pre-citizenship, police had full authority.
Oh,
And so for her to resist the police would have been a very big act in them days of defiance.
oh yeah, for Nan to actually say no, I want my kids back, would not have been a safe thing for her to do. And because of the fractures that existed, I mean, I only speak for me on this, not even for Dad, but because of the fractures that existed in our relationship, because of the pain around being taken, none of this was actually able to be resolved in her lifetime. So she died before all of her kids really realised that she fought for them. She died before she realised that her kids had fought for her as kids as well. She died before any of that pain was actually resolved. And I feel for her. I feel for. Yeah, I didn't have a relationship with my nan, but
Also,
that's sad. That's sad for her too.
also
Uncle,
on
this
that,
is a police form from that.
yeah,
This is the
also
Victoria
on
Police
that,
form.
there's another thing to take into account. Her son, my younger brother who died in a police cell, wrote a letter in 1965. I can't find it. I think it's on that Philip Fox file. Telling me about his mother's birthday, and I'm reading this letter wondering what the hell's going on here. Well, it's a funny incident. In '68, I went back into Tirana, and when I got in there, I said, hey, I'm a citizen now. Are you going to let me out or what? They called me in the office 2 days later and presented me this letter, which had been written. Now, we are talking 1968. This letter was written in 1965, and it was addressed, and I'm quoting verbatim from memory because it was the first time I knew I had other brothers and sisters and I had a mother. So that's why I'm saying it's always stuck in my memory. It goes, it's addressed to Larry Walsh, care of Tirana Children's Home, because when my mother knew it was a children's home. You don't know me, but my name is Joe. Last night was my mother's birthday.
Uncle, I know that from the statement that you were concerned not to mention your brother's name. Would you like us to pause that on the...
Well, leave that name out for the
Okay.
moment. So, you don't
there
know
might be
me,
some-
my name is Dirt. Last night was my mother's birthday. And we held a party to
Uncle?
celebrate.
Uncle, I'm not very good with the technical matters, but I think to pause the live stream so that your little brother's name isn't mentioned, I need to do something a bit disruptive.
Yep, Emily's just going to tell them.
Okay, so do we continue or...
This story's not a secret one, is it?
I don't
no,
know.
just
just,
don't wanna
the
use his
name.
name.
Yeah.
They can do it.
Yeah.
Because this story has been told before. The
Yeah.
first time
It's
Dad
not the
told this
story,
story
just the name.
publicly was actually with one of Sue Ann's cousins, Stacey Piper, at the museum in her first exhibition, the 1967 referendum exhibition that she did. Dad told that story and was video recorded and included in that exhibition.
Anyway, so the brother sent a letter saying, you don't know me, his name, and last night was my mother's birthday and we had a party to celebrate her birthday. Mum burst into tears and she wouldn't stop crying. She went into her bedroom and locked the door and kept crying. In the morning when Mum came out of bed, we asked her, why were you so upset? And she told us about you. And so I'm writing here to inform you of, and I am your brother, and here is a photo of your other brothers and sisters, and a photo of your mum.
And one of
I-
him. He sent one of him, didn't
And yeah, that's what I said, all your brothers and sisters. And here is a photo of your mum. And so I decided to write here where Mum thought you were, in the hope that we could reach you so that Mum could get to see you. And the address was in Swan Hill. I had to
Uncle,
convince
how
you.
long had that letter been sitting on the
65,
Tirana file?
and this was 68.
For 3
he?
years.
3
and a half
years.
years at that stage.
3 years later, because I now was a citizen, I was allowed to see it.
But I thank Bunjil for that, Uncle. I thank Bunjil for that caseworker who went back and thought about it, because that's where my dad's story as a stolen man differs from many other stolen men and women, is that Dad knew he had a home to come back to and where his home was earlier than a lot of other stolen people found out.
Yeah, and
You know, they knew they were stolen, they knew they had homes to come back to, but Dad actually, through his brother and that letter, was able to find his home, you know, so he was able to return home in his teens as a result of that.
it took a lot of paperwork back in them days.
Well, not return home fully, but he was able to get
Go
a
visit.
relationship.
Then Mum told me about, then when we finally had conversations, she told me about that she couldn't find Joylene or Patsy. Oh, scrubbed it. they're alive, sorry, that she couldn't find my two sisters. So I went and seen my social worker. I said, I already know one. And told her about Joylene. And so I went and seen my social worker, and we had a conversation. I said, I believe I've got another sister I don't know much about. And he opened my file.
Social worker?
This was a social worker. He opened my file and suggested that maybe he'd make me a cup of tea. And I was okay with it, but he left the file open, and I think he wanted me to sneak behind the desk and read it, so I did. And there was my sister's name and her address. I knew the stress it caused other people finding out that they were fostered or adopted, so I contacted the family. I made arrangements to meet the foster father.
More respectful than me. I would have gone straight to, so he's good, my dad.
Well, I didn't know whether she knew or not, and I didn't want to be the person to set in motion a train of events that I'd seen in other friends and families. So I contacted them, I told them who I was. We met up, had a couple of beers, well, after work. Back in them days, 6 o'clock swivel. So it was just 1 or 2 beers before the end of the day. You should have been in a pub between 5 and 6 to see how many beers people would line up just to get that 1 hour swivel back in the day. But we had a couple of beers and discussed it. He said he'd never discussed it with her, blah, blah, blah. So I gave them the chance to talk to my sister about it.
Gracious.
I actually got to meet her by pretending to be a friend of the family, and then to make sure that they were letting her know, because I then met her and discussed that she had brothers and sisters and a mother and so forth. And I let Joylene know. I went and said to Mum at the time, she's not ready yet. Might take me another 6 to 12 months. My baby brother, I guess under Mum's instruction, had a peek into my address diary. You know how you carry the little notebook with addresses on it? So she shot down there to tell the sister she was her mother, and the sister wasn't ready for it, as I said. And so the sister ran away for a couple of years. Finally, she got to accept it.
I was going to say not very long.
No, just a couple of years.
Only long enough to process it.
Process
That's a big
it.
thing to process, finding out your family isn't your family and you have a different family and reconceiving of what the concept of family is.
So I
That's
waited
huge.
for her to come to terms with it herself before we had the next discussion. Mum didn't mean to, but she put it back an extra year than it needed to be, because Mum was finally going to get the chance to see this daughter that she hadn't seen since a baby, and understand me. It was no other reason that her wanting to see her baby at that time, because she only seen that baby before it was taken.
Well, and that aunt was a proper like, Dad was 2.5 and he was the middle child, so Joylene was a tiny bit older and Auntie
The
Pat
other one was
younger,
a couple of years
even younger
younger.
than 2.5.
So she got taken without knowing that she was fostered, adopted or anything.
Like,
And
but
so-
also kudos to Nan, who literally had like 4 babies in 4 years.
But what I'm getting at is that Mum, and it's not a blame to Mum, Mum was so excited at finally getting to see the last child that she'd lost. She jumped the mark. As I say, I don't hold that against her. If I'd been in the same position, I might have done the same thing. But for me, it put it back a year or two, because she had to come to terms with being fostered and adopted, but not knowing that she was Aboriginal and not knowing that she had other family. And for some people that does take a while, because
Also,
one of my biggest things was that other people, because of what I was doing, and they knew that I was helping get my family back together, some other families would talk to me about it. And it was like one time I went to visit, Mum decided to take me to visit one of her sisters. And we got there, and her kids had returned. They were, I think 20s.
Do you mean
Right.
Uncle Chop
Yeah.
and Auntie Eva?
Yeah, I think they were 20s. And walk in the door, and Auntie Teresa gives me a hug and everything. And she says, oh, look who I've got. And we look at each other. G'day, Chop. G'day, Larry. G'day, Herbie. G'day, Larry. You know each other. Yeah, we're all in the same places. How's that? We're cousins and we didn't know it. We're in the same places and we are from the same family lines, but we didn't know it. Yet we got along. It was funny. So blood ended up being thicker than water in a way. And we'd also heard of each other in other places through reputations we had. Like Cousin Choc set the records for weights and running and all these physical activities. I set the records for how many cigarettes that you couldn't find that I might have and how much marijuana I might have been smoking in Tarada. Here was the funny thing, I'd also escaped from Tarada a few times, but they kept putting me in this bloody maintenance job, which means that I kept having the run of the place, and so I had lots of hidey hot spots, and I could go for a walk when I liked.
Yeah, but give the boys a chance. Don't run out their spots.
I'm not running out their spots. I'm saying so we all had reputations in our own ways for the way we did things, you know. Choc was a very smart fella and very, very athletic. I was always made captain of the volleyball team because I was always making sure we won. You know, like one time Screw joined our team and we were losing and I told the Screw could he mind shutting his ears for a couple of minutes. I have a few words to say to the team. And he said, okay. So he walked away a little bit. And I said, what the fuck are you guys up to? I got 3 packets of cigarettes on this game and 1 packet's for you if we bloody win. Oh, you mean we're getting cigarettes too? Yeah, right, we're winning. And the Screw said, I heard all that. So they kept searching and searching to find my 3 packs of cigarettes, which they never found. And I was accused of always having strange incense around me, which was code for, we know you're smoking marijuana and we wish we could catch you. But what the hell? It was their fault. And even in one, it says that they asked me, would I escape? And they said, he looked indifferent and said, oh, I don't know yet. It depends on how I feel. And yet they kept letting me into jobs that allowed me the freedom to, if I wanted to, which I did a few times, one hot day, go for a walk, get a Coke,
They also
buy an ice cream, relax, but by the time I got back, they reported that I'd gone missing.
They also never bothered to follow up on any time that Dad went missing or escaped from either foster care, orphanages, or
Youth training
youth
centres.
training centres, because he did escape from all of them.
And I don't
Stories my dad tells me about before those times, there's always some large incident that then results in his desire to leave and Dad taking matters into his own hands and doing so.
because they didn't want to kill him.
At no point
I had people
does
come
anyone...
up, big tough boys. One kept having a go at me. I said, no, I don't want to fight. He kept punching me and I just kept walking towards him saying, I don't want to. And then as soon as my eyes changed colour, I was grabbed and one of his mates just went like that and all he would say, did you see him? He was going to kill me. He was going to kill me. Did you see him? And that was the toughest bloke in the place.
So, like,
So I'd leave so I wouldn't kill him.
so that would, you know,
But
so...
I wasn't going to discuss that because...
That's another tough incident, but the incidents I'm thinking of are more like, you know, but what I'm trying to say is every time Dad escaped or left, no one ever asked Dad. And maybe this is just my folly to think that if a kid is acting out and regularly running away from somewhere, you might ask them, hey, is something going on? But no one ever saw my dad's repetitive behaviour of running away as anything other than him being non-compliant and causing a muck.
But I also object to running away because I never ran.
He just left.
I just would casually stroll out. If that meant I was going down the road to the shops to get a can or bottle of Coke, an ice cream or whatever. One day I disappeared for 6 days, but that was a good party. We won't go into that.
I'm glad you pulled that document up as well, because that document is an incredibly sorry to flick back, but that's an incredibly healing document, because most of Malva's kids didn't realise that, you know, it took many years to realise that she put in this amount of effort in the face of great violence, potential violence.
And
this is a police officer who has interviewed her.
Yeah, but and me and my sisters being raised, being told they didn't want us.
And the
here's
officer
the proof
saying
that-
she seemed quite definite.
Yeah, but we grew up believing we were not wanted because the authorities kept lying. And it's one of the ways the authorities used to tell the foster parents about, if they ask about their background, just say that their parents didn't want them or their parents are dead, stuff like that. And after a while, you do start to believe it because it's the only story you're hearing. You're not hearing any other. So,
And the thing I've learned
So
over
what you
time
learn-
is no child is unwanted. Even children who end up in foster care scenarios or without their original parents, no child has no value. No child is unwanted, and no child should be unwanted by society. And should we allow that to be a narrative in our society?
but the whole point was the government authorities won't admit even that they were giving advice to foster parents to say these things. And so the government sort of wipes its hand of responsibility of making young people feel worthless. You know, oh no, your parents didn't want you, that's why you're here. How does that, as a kid, how would that make you feel? Of course, you're unwanted. Nobody wants you. Your own family didn't want you.
Uncle,
And yes, I still get angry about that.
this was seen as a problem that you wanted to find your family. You can see at the bottom of this letter, in the last paragraph, there is a sentence which talks about.
Councillor, can I just stop again? Is this in the information pack as well? Or?
This is in Annexure A at page 142. Sorry.
If you
will.
identify them, because
Yes.
it'll be very difficult for us to.
Yes, to keep
locate
track of it.
there. Yes.
Apologies,
I
I
will
had
remind
just
you if it doesn't
sneakily
Yes.
texted the screen operator the page number and the words didn't come out of my mouth.
Yes, thank you.
So that is page 142 at the bottom of the page, and you will see there that a social worker sees your what she calls relentless desire to track down your family. She says the main problem may be Larry's relentless desire to track down his family, but according to Mrs. McRae, they can offer so little that there is little point in opening up this avenue, and so it was obviously shut down.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's correct, but it's that what they, and still I believe today, do not realise that one time when I was up home visiting rallies at Cumra, old Uncle Colin Walker said this to me. He said, you know, they took a lot of kids on the belief that the parents, because they had no fridge or no cupboards, that the parents could look after their kids. Well, the parents would have fresh fruit and vegetables from where they were working. So you were being fed fresh fruit and vegetables. People were still going out and fishing and rabbiting and gathering meat fresh, rather than we didn't have fridges. People were being fed, but because the welfare workers would see no cupboards and no fridge, they would assume that we were poor. But we had jobs and we were able to supplement from what we knew of: fishing, rabbiting, hunting, some of the plants we still knew that we could use. And so the whole construct of taking people was based on a European standard of living, which didn't apply to itinerant workers.
Well, and also didn't apply to our cultural worldview, which at that time, or in Malthus' time,
Families looked after
family and the making sure your family had resources was as simple as putting them on a river. You know, they were on a humpy on the Goulburn for a reason, because they were resource plenty there. You know, she left the kids with her mum and her sister there for a reason, because there was no danger in them running out of food or shelter or appropriate things that they needed to care for themselves. But I suppose it wasn't seen that way by the state.
The state were judging by where they lived in Melbourne, not where.
We should
people
talk
lived
about
in
your criminal
country
convictions
areas.
soon, though.
Oh yeah, let's go. there.
Uncle,
No,
I have that as the next thing that I would really like to make sure we cover, is you went into Tirana, I think it was at 14 years old, for a minor burglary offence.
Yeah.
And I wanted to speak to you about what you think the impact of the fact that you had that criminal record from 2.5 had on that trajectory, how you ended up there.
Well, I don't know about whether it had an effect on the Tirana one, but it would have been noted by whether it be the Children's Court or the judge. It only when it started appearing on a regular basis, whenever I got arrested and taken to court, about having childhood convictions going back to 1956. The police were using, even for my first conviction, were using a record that I wasn't even aware existed from 14 onwards.
Yeah.
And every time I try and challenge it, the judges wouldn't listen. I go, you know, like there was one court case for driving without a licence, and Your Honour, he's got convictions going all the way just because they wanted me to plead guilty to other charges, and I refused to because I didn't do them. I admit to the driving offence, yes. See, that's the other thing. Sometimes I got off charges because my record was, when I go to court, if I did the offence, I'd plead guilty. If I didn't, I would fight. And
Daddy?
I'd sometimes say to the judges, look at me, Judge, every time I've been here, when I've done something wrong, I've pleaded guilty, you know? So I used the own arguments of my pleads, whether it was guilty or not guilty, to defend myself when I knew I was innocent. But every time, it always came up. And, Your Honour, he has convictions going back to 1956. And when I'd say to the judge, how would I know? I was only 2. The judge was thinking I'd be cheeky and add an extra little bit to my sentence.
So I just wanted to point out that in Dad's statement, paragraph 32, he clarifies how his first offence that led him to Tirana was affected by his early childhood criminal conviction. He says, I was committed to Tirana when I was 14 for minor offences, doing time for breaking into a house and stealing an electric shaver, transistor radio and some money from a money box. The reason given on the court order was that the reason that he was given that he had to receive a custodial sentence on the court order was that he was likely to lapse into a life of crime.
And I'll just if we can move a bit further down, this is page 78 of Annexure A, and we can see down on lower on that page, likely to lapse into a life of crime is in fact the charge.
Yes.
Well, there you go. I thought it was a... Sorry, I misread it wrong. I thought it was a commentary on it. There you go.
Charges.
You know, so Dad was... and why was he likely to lapse into a life of crime? Because he already had a previous criminal conviction. And his involvement with the police, which is sort of separate from by the time he got to Tirana, because he was getting involved with the police many years before Tirana actually happened. His involvement with the police all stemmed from an incident when he was 8. Tell that story, Dad.
Well, I'd been down to the local shop. Now, I don't know if you know the Hadfield-Glenroy area, but it was surrounded by North Street, South Street, East Street, West Street. And within that was all of what was known as Hadfield, which was part of Glenroy. So I was walking along North Street from the Milk Bar to, which was 3 streets over from where I was staying in Hadfield. I was walking along, the coppers see me and they pulled me over and said, what's your name? So I give them my full name. Where do you live? I give them the address. And they said, have you ever been in trouble before? And I said, no. So I walked off. Coppers drove off. I walked off, heading towards where I was living. They came back, threw me in the back of the divvy, called me a liar, and I had criminal convictions. He took me up to the cop shop and gave me a beating. They didn't even read how old I was when I got the criminal conviction. I'm 8. And they've taken me up to the cop shop, giving me beating for being a criminal.
So it took all the way, Dad, all the way from 8 when he started to get accused by police officers regularly and beaten by police officers regularly for doing crimes. It took all the way from 8, took him 6 years of being told that he was a criminal before he actually committed a crime.
No, I actually started committing them at 10 or 11 because the truth was I'm getting picked up and beaten and questioned for things that were being done that I hadn't
Well, that's
no
3 years
involvement.
then. That's 3 years of the police bleeding you
That,
before
that
you actually
had
committed
no
a crime.
involvement on anything. So I thought, well, if I'm going to get beat up for not doing them, I might as well do them. And let's be honest, if you're in my situation, you're being accused and beaten up for things you haven't done, what is your reaction going to be?
Also, just like take a brief. My sister just pointed this out to me. Look at Dad's prior convictions there. Dad has a prior conviction for breaking and stealing from his own home. What? Can you break and steal from your own home? Like, how intense is the state's need to criminalise my father that taking something from his own home is considered an offence?
Which, by the
And
way-
the earlier offence of loitering, do you remember what that was about?
Oh yeah. See, it was. I think it was second form. No, it might have been the start of third. No, it was second form.
That's 14, eh?
Yeah. Let's just say, me and some of the teachers had incidences too. Like, I've been accused, and someone told my daughter down there, Heather, well, back in them days, teachers could belch it. I unfortunately wouldn't stand still and get belted. I was known to shape up to them and even strike back. I was not afraid of anyone, adult, cop, you name it. Because I always had the view, well, if they're going to hurt me, fine. But I'm going to hurt back. I decided to, well, the school play was on. I was not very popular with some of the teachers and quite a few students. So me and a couple of people went down to school play was going to be at Coburg Town Hall. Now there was Brown's pub on the corner. And me at 14, I could pass, well, let's just say no publican ever questioned me age until I was 30. It was the first time I was ever asked, are you old enough to drink here? I was 30.
It's similar to me. I've started
But
being ID'd now, and I do not understand it because, like by all means, it's very flattering.
But so I went there.
Very flattering.
I went there, had a few beers, me and a couple others. We went to go in to watch the play. Some teacher took offence to the fact that I'd walked out of the pub to go to the play, and some argument ensued. He threatened me. I said, come ahead, let's have it. So he went back inside and phoned the police about me drinking in public land. And then when after that one, I went to school and he was trying to get me expelled, and I thought, shit, you're too late, mate, I've already quit. He was a long-haired dude who fancied himself a bit of an intellectual, and I just considered him a wanker. And
The teacher.
yeah, and so whenever he taught, I wasn't interested. It's funny, but everyone talks about me this way or that way. I will admit, in my time, I set the record in secondary school ball wagging in that secondary school. I still passed subjects. I never did homework. I never did assignments. And yet people were telling me I was going to be especially dickheads like him, that I was going to be always a labourer, and that anything else I was dreaming of, I was dreaming. And I hated people telling me what I was going to be or what I could or couldn't do, because that had been the basis in orphanages, in foster homes, and in government welfare. So, as far as I was concerned, even by 14, I'd become the person who would go, you say I can't, fuck you, I will. You say this will get me into trouble for doing that, well, let's see how much trouble it'll get me into. The attitude was shaped by 14.
But you do mean for the future generations coming, you know, tomorrow, that doing your homework and not wagging is a great ace thing, hey? You've learnt from that, hey?
For me, it was about what they were teaching. They were not teaching any, like...
Protest to colonial education.
Well, from primary school onward, we were savages, and we were thieves, and we were only good at football and boxing or thieving. Well, thank you very much. I don't like what you're teaching about me, because you're causing me fights, you schools. You schools are causing me fights because you're saying I'm a primitive savage who will steal or bash you. You're saying to me and to all these kids that I am a savage. You're saying to me, and all these kids are repeating it, that I, and they may not have used the word bastard, but the kids did. Oh, yeah, I'm an orphan.
Bastard means something different to Dad than it does to me. Bastard seems to be the biggest insult that was hurled at him, like being a black bastard, seems to have been like the child go-to thing for him at the time. I mean, I think there was a the go-to insult was different in my generation.
Schools were not helping by what they were teaching, was actually making other kids think I was the dangerous one.
And
when the truth
Uncle,
was they were the dangerous ones.
you can see it in these notes that exactly what you're expressing now was something that you were really strongly expressing then at the time. These notes are amazing when there's the discussion of your family history and your awareness. It says he's bitter about having been brought up in boys' homes where he felt Aboriginals were discriminated against. And you make this wonderful, ironic comment down under employment. He said, like Aboriginals, I'm too lazy to advance. You've given yourself your own principles synopsis of yourself. And
that's also tongue-in-cheek, to be fair. They might not have read that way, but I know that's my father also being like, oh, you told me repetitively that I'm too lazy, and now you're asking me to do this thing. Sorry, I'm too lazy.
Yeah, but it's like...
And this, sorry, I should mention, this is page 113 of Annexure A.
Well, you've got to remember, it's that for me, there was always something in me that refused to believe that they were right. There was something in me that just always was, hold on, I'm going to see if that's true or not. It's why I say sometimes I'm one of, not the best, but one of the best planners, because I'm very thorough. I don't leave any stone unturned if I'm looking into something. even if it hurts me. I don't care. Even if it makes me want to sometimes feel like vomiting. I don't care. It's got to be done. I refuse to not. And it's one of my greatest skills that I have a concentration level that borderlines on being insane, because I can walk past you in the street because I'm so concentrating on something, I don't even see you.
Yeah, I walked up to him on a train once and he was like so deep in thought. I was like, Dad, 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 Dad. And so when I touched him, and he was like, Bella, what are you doing? I was like, I've been calling you for 10 minutes, whatever. So you can get deep in his thoughts.
Yeah, people walk up to me and go, didn't you see me the other day? And I go, no, why? Because I was waving at you.
You're not deliberately a snob, are you?
No, it's that if I'm onto something, that's all my concentration goes into it. I think I know quite a few that maybe have the same ability to, when they're concentrating on getting something done, they'll put all their mind and effort into working out how to do it. See, I'm not one, even though it shows I can read or write, I'm not one to write a plan until I've worked out every detail in my head. Whether it be I'm having discussions with someone about the plan and they're helping feed me information on the plan. It's like one I'm working on now. I've been working with a couple of friends on, and when the time comes, I will bring them forward as part of the team. It's just that they've asked me, and this is the one thing that really shits me about people, especially today's elders, and I've got to say this with all honesty. Some of these people who are elders have been very skilled in the areas they are good at, you know?
Yeah.
But the minute they get older, they think they can interfere in other bloody areas that they know nothing about. And I usually, whenever the Parkies or some of the other members of my family go, oh, I'm an elder now, eh? And I go, yeah, as long as you don't ever interfere in my effing business. Because I have a way of operating, and it's different to everyone else, I must admit. But I make sure I know every fact. I do not say yes or no to joining into doing something unless I'm aware of the whole facts. I will not join a team unless I have some say in the selection criteria, because I know what people's skills I need.
Consensus-based decision-making model.
I look for those people to assist me in what I need done, but I also look for them to sometimes lead it, because I know they have that skill. They just need people who, like some of the elders did with me, encourage me and help me bring those skills out.
Can I also just say, with this document that Sorella's got up, and I know, Sorella, that you want to ask a question because I can see your lovely face making those motions, but you can already tell the kinds of assumptions that are made. Like my dad's potential, it's very, very clear what they think of Dad's potential in here. Dad's telling them about prospects in that base paragraph, about prospects that he has for work, and their end assumption of that is that his future prospects aren't high. Every encounter you come against, there's an assumption that Dad will not do well for himself, to become criminal. It makes me incredibly proud. It's something actually I wrote on Facebook when I was reflecting last night, when I was reflecting on this whole process. This whole process just makes me feel so angry, sad and weary. But the only thing that gives me sort of like something else from it is that I feel pride at I'm able to see resilience in action through my father when especially through understanding intimately his story. This is resilience in action.
Look, I see it differently. I just see it as one person's story. You see, for me, the truth is, which is one of the problems with being a stolen genes, is my pain is not the same as the next person with a stolen gene's pain.
Uncle, I'm going to take you to stolen generations. One thing I really want to capture before we leave this topic is one of the subjects that you spoke about with me, which I think both you and your daughter really felt saved you, and you were talking about elders. And the thing that you spoke about as being incredibly powerful was that when you came back, you had been chosen to have a really particular role in your community, really quite soon after birth. And so when you came back into your community, you immediately had responsibilities and something to do with the community. And I just wanted you to tell us about what that is, how you were chosen and what it meant you had to do.
Well, I'll have to tell it as a story because it is a true story. One day, after I was 17, and this was after going 14 and that, and then once I hit a certain age, I didn't need no one's permission to do anything, so I go to visit family. Anyway, we were in a pub, having a few beers, slight argument broke out, which we won, but we got banned. So we're walking back to my auntie's place, their mum, and they're getting told off, and I'm going, oh sweet, I'm underage. They're my older cousins, they took me to the pub. I'm the underage, so I'll just sit back while they get told off. And after they told them off, they turned to me and said, and you're their epic elder, why didn't you stop them? And I looked at my cousin going, what the fuck are you talking about? And one of them said, actually, cuz, that's why every time you come to town, I'll pick you up so we can go to the pub. Because if I was with you, it didn't matter if I got in trouble, as long as you never said nothing, I'd be safe. So I found I had some responsibility, but I didn't want it because I had I still had to learn to control my rage and anger. But some of my cousins from then on would always, if I was around, take a back seat or look sheepishly guilty when I came around. But I never used any of it until I was 30, and I've always kept it quiet, who I am in the family. Some of my other family members, well, like an example was there was one bloke who was head of an organisation, and he thought I was from some other family branch of the Walshes, and then his older sister said no, he's actually from the larger branch of the Walshes, and he may have a say in it. So all of a sudden that bloke decided better to talk to me than keep fighting with me. He kept losing anyway, so in political arguments, but and I just said, look, no, I'm just who I am. Because I've never claimed publicly my eldership that I've had from a very young age. Because up until 30, I would have been a terrible leader. Too much anger, too much hate, too much rage. And if no one else was helping me control it, I had to learn to control it myself. So I couldn't accept in my own heart the leadership role until I could actually control myself. I've never gone out of my way to say it, but because some of my cousins were some of the parkies that caused trouble, whenever I came into town, and all of a sudden when my cousins see me they get all antsy, and so some of the other Parkies who were mates of theirs started seeing me as their elder too, although I never mentioned it. Because for me, I see a difference between elder and leadership. And I see too many of people confusing leadership and eldership. And I believe this is what is causing a lot of problems within our communities today, these wrong misconceptions of a system that existed for many generations, and thanks to European intervention has broke down a lot, but now it's got out of hand because, shit, you turn 56, you're an elder. I'm sorry, I even worked with elders, well, no, misters and missuses during my travels around Australia. And some of them were damn well younger than me.
So Dad has this whole thing, right? And apparently it comes from the old ones, like the old ones when he was a young one. And it's before my time, so I'll just have to believe him. And it's definitely not what my generation is doing, but that's maybe we should. Well, maybe that's a conversation. Apparently, in order to refer to some of the old aunties and uncles after we were colonised, in order to give them a way to be respected, still referred to as an elder, they were called Mr. or Mrs. So the Mr. So Mr. So an example that's well known around Melbourne would be Barack. Some people would have called, particularly in the white circles, would have called him, Mr. Barack to try and indicate great, and so when I suppose Dad's referring, the Mr. and the Mrs. is in reference to when we were under a colonial construct and not allowed to use our own language. And so that was a way of trying to create our own language or instill some notion of eldership within it. So that's what. So he's this whole thing about Mr. and Mrs.
I'll give it easier. Before William Cooper become Uncle William.
That's the one who I was thinking about. It's all William. He's Mr.
Before, he was always introduced as Mr. William Cooper. Back in the day when Auntie Marge Tucker was one of the women's leaders, she was always referred to as respect Mrs. Tucker. Leadership, there's only me and two blokes that joke with each other about it, and I don't want to mention one of them on character because he might kid me. That will give you a clue who it is, eh? Yeah, me and him joke about Mr. because for us, it is respect.
Which is interesting because I've had this conversation with.
We try to practice it between each other rather than the rest of the community because, oh my God, if the rest of the community practiced it, we'd have 10,000 leaders.
Oh, but also, Dad and I have discussed this many times, and language changes throughout the generations, and I'll be fucked before I'm called Mrs. no matter how old I get. No.
Yeah, but it's that.
Not that I'm suggesting I'm an elder. I'm not. I'm just saying maybe there's others who are also in that scenario who don't necessarily want to be a
But it is an
Mr.
important
or a
thing to
Mrs.
remember that the systems we're doing today have been forced on us by European civilization. And to them what an elder means? They don't know. They have elders of churches. They have elders of this and that. And they have people in old homes that they call elders. So Euro has no respect for the idea of what an elder is, and it's creeping into our community where anyone who thinks they're an elder can have a say on bloody things that they know nothing about, and they keep interfering in my epping business.
Uncle, I feel as though that is a beautiful place to stop.
Yeah.
I would like to. I'm going to leave that statement right with him. That's
where
Dad's.
we could get some T-shirts made.
No, it's just it is a point of view that I have because I have worked with some great leaders, men and women I still, even though they've passed on, admire. And they were great leaders. And they were Mr. and Mrs. They weren't uncle this, auntie that. They were Mr.
But I will add, uncle this and auntie that is the same attempt to install a cultural phenomenon into a language that is not our own. So auntie and uncle is again a more modern attempt, the same way Mr. and Mrs. is, to place in some form of respect lines, and I'm not saying anything on what Dad said because that's his prerogative to.
Well,
that's not. I'm not in that stage of the arena of the world where I can comment.
I still have people walk up to me from some of the parkies that are my age and or older, and they still use the term Mr. So they use it out of respect. No other time will they ever say Mr. or Mrs. to someone unless it's someone they respect.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Maybe
Yes,
it's
it
your
may
raising.
be old school. Yes, it may be old school. But we need that type of thing again.
Maybe
I
it's-
need the differentiation between the 40, 50, 100 leaders we've got to actually who are our leaders. I do not mind people being respected for living a long time. I do not mind, it's like, you know, someone once said to me about my cousin, and I said to him, look, no matter his life, in the last 10 years, he has been a great role model for those young who are getting in trouble the same way he was. There's another one in the western suburbs I have great admiration for because him and his wife have fostered a few kids, but more, he was someone who learnt from his mistakes and teaches young people today about those mistakes so that they don't do them. And some people call him elder out there, and I'm one of them because I see what he does is what makes our community stronger. That they are pointing out to young ones in a gentle, soft way of mistakes they made that they hope that the next generation don't make them. And also they help, and now their children help to raise Aboriginal in foster care. Those are the type of people that deserve a leadership role. And maybe they're not recognised because they're just uncle or auntie so-and-so, but for me, they are much more important than anything I've ever done. And Isabel's seen me when I see them. Hugs. And I always say, these people, what they do is more important than me. Because without them, the strength of our community would die. Without these people wanting to help young not make the same mistakes as them, without these people admitting what they did wrong, to help other people not make the same mistakes, that's a leadership role. It's just not recognised anymore because you're just another foster carer or you're just another parent. No, it's the little things that make leaders, not the big things. Look, if I was a leader that some people claim me to be, I don't. If I was the leader, I would be doing what they do. But instead at times I've had to take a bigger role. And I prefer that role. It's like I've taken kids in my area, I fostered and brought them to ACCA meetings, brought them to ACCA family stuff. And people sometimes ask me why I haven't adopted or fostered. No,
Fact
my
one.
criminal record was one reason, but the other thing is that I've even found it difficult just raising my own kids. Because how do you treat people when the way you've been treated, but you don't want to treat them that way? So, for me, the question that still hangs over, that no one teaches what a leadership role is. I was very lucky. I had good teachers because they knew where I was at. They could see I finally got control of my temper, and they took me to things. They introduced me to people. First time I ever
Is that a
spoke.
good note to get to
Right,
on?
no, but the first time I ever spoke at the Advancement League was on a request from one of my uncles. Not I got up and spoke. It was, I want to introduce my nephew, I wasn't his blood, because we've had a discussion about this. Nephew, talk. It was time, he took me to different meetings to learn the way things worked, and then when he thought I was ready, he said, "You're talking today." And there was another one that did that to me at the legal service once, but I forgave him.
Chair,
That's what I mean about leadership.
should we break now? Uncle, we have
Right.
beautiful lunch catered here today. If the chair considers it's an appropriate time to break, we might
Time
have
to
that.
eat.
The Yoorrook Justice Commission is adjourned.